All right, today we're going to dive into a pretty wild idea. What if our sense of justice, what if it isn't just some legal system or a moral code that we made up? What if it's actually a fundamental force of nature, something that's literally hardwired into our biology? I mean, think about it for a second. When you see or experience something that's just deeply unfair, it doesn't just register as wrong in your head, right? No, it's a gut punch. It can make you feel angry or even sick. It lights this fire in you, this powerful urge to do something. But why? Why is that feeling so universal, so incredibly powerful? Well, that brings us to the core idea we're digging into today. The theory suggests that this deep need for fairness, it isn't just something we learn from our parents or from society. It's a fundamental biological signal, kind of like hunger or thirst. It's our body's way of telling us, hey, something is seriously out of balance here. And to really get our heads around this, we've got to start by looking at how our own brains work. Okay, so let's start right inside the brain. The theory basically says that our brain has this kind of built-in compass, and it's constantly, always, pointing toward one specific state, a state of balance, of equilibrium. And get this, that state is what this theory calls justice. Now, the key concept here is something called a neural attractor field. And yeah, it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Just imagine a landscape with a bunch of hills and valleys. If you put a ball anywhere on a hillside, where's it going to go? Right. Gravity's going to pull it down to the lowest, most stable spot at the bottom of a valley. A neural attractor is just like that valley. It's that stable, low-energy state that your brain's activity is always, naturally trying to settle into. And what's so cool about this is how it totally reframes what justice even is. It's not some complicated legal code, nope. In neural terms, justice is just the brain's favorite place to be. It's that point of minimum strain, maximum coherence, where our thoughts and emotions are finally in sync. It's the bottom of that valley we just talked about. So what's injustice? Well, that's just anything that knocks the ball up the hill, creating all that tension and strain that our brain is hardwired to resolve. So this whole principle, it doesn't just apply to, abstract neural networks. It applies right inside our own minds. Let's zoom out just one level. Turns out every single one of us has a kind of internal political system, complete with its own power struggles and bitter conflicts. The theory has a name for this, self-discrimination. It's basically when different parts of you are at war with each other. You know the feeling, right? One desire gets silenced, one emotion totally takes over another, or some rule you learned from society crushes an impulse that feels really authentic to you. That's what creates that internal strain, that awful feeling of being pulled in a million different directions. And this is such a perfect example, a conflict I think we've all felt. That moment when you're exhausted and you know you need to rest. But there's that other part of you, that little voice that feels guilty and calls you lazy. That's a classic battle, right? The productive self discriminating against the resting self. This inner conflict creates a ton of strain, and it forces your mind to start working overtime to resolve that tension and find its way back to balance. And the source material for this theory just nails it with this quote. Discrimination is natural and a fact, but the average level should be maintained as flat as possible by distribution of power and opportunities. It's like our minds intuitively get the goal here. We're never going to completely eliminate conflict, but we have to try to keep the playing field as level as possible, right? Distribute the power so no one single part of us can totally dominate all the others. Okay, so now let's zoom out again. If one person's mind is like a tiny little society, what do you think happens when we scale this whole principle up to an actual society with millions of people? Well, it turns out the exact same dynamics apply, just on a massive, massive scale. So when discrimination isn't just an inner battle anymore, but it's baked into the social structure, it creates something the theory calls collective strain. Things like humiliation, exclusion, blocked opportunities, these aren't just abstract political problems. They are powerful forces that create this huge, widespread imbalance and tension within the, you could say, collective mind of a society. And that strain, it's what leads to things like extreme polarization and ideological extremism. So here's the really crucial takeaway. From this point of view, social justice movements, they aren't just random ideological accidents. They're a natural corrective force. Think of them as the collective equivalent of your own mind trying to resolve a painful internal conflict. A society that's under a lot of strain is just unstable. And these movements, they're the inevitable pushback toward balance, back toward that collective attractor for fairness. All right, time for the biggest zoom out of all. If this force is really as fundamental as the theory claims, then we should be able to see its signature not just in a brain or in a single society, but across the entire sweep of human history. And you know what? You absolutely can. Just look at how the scope of who we think deserves justice has expanded over time. We started out with justice just for our own little tribe, right? Then it became about our nation or our empire. And now we're slowly, painstakingly moving toward a humanitarian ideal where justice applies to everyone. That is the justice attractor at work, pulling our collective morality toward greater and greater inclusion. And you know, this core idea isn't even new. As we can see here, philosophers for centuries have been describing this exact same fundamental movement. Mulla Sadra saw existence evolving toward a higher unity. Hegel saw conflict, thesis versus antithesis, resolving into a new synthesis. Even Aristotle saw the psyche's need to balance its impulses. They all sense this same natural pull toward equilibrium. What's new and so exciting about this theory is that it offers a potential scientific mechanism for what these great thinkers observed in the human condition. So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us with this incredibly powerful, unified picture of justice, not as an opinion, but as a fundamental force operating at every single level of human experience. I mean, what's so compelling here is how this one single principle, this movement toward a stable, low-strain attractor state, it connects everything. It helps explain how our brains organize themselves, the conflicts we feel inside, the dynamics of our societies, and even that slow, upward curve of our collective morality throughout history. It really all boils down to this one profound idea. Justice is the attractor field of consciousness at every scale. It's not just an option. It's more like a destination. It's an emergent property of any complex system that's trying to find balance, from a single neuron all the way up to an entire civilization. And that, of course, leaves us with one last fascinating question to chew on. If our biology, our psychology, and our entire history are all being pulled by this invisible current toward greater and greater fairness, what does the next stage of that evolution even look like? Where is this force pulling humanity next?